She didn't know the man inside, but the picture in her trembling hand told her she had nowhere else to go. The road behind her was a ribbon of shadow, swallowed by fog and silence. Her feet ached from the gravel's bite, and her legs moved, more from memory than strength. The cold crept up her arms like vines, but she didn't shiver anymore. She had passed the threshold of hunger, cold, and fear. What remained was something quieter, a kind of numbness, only grief or desperation. Kentich. The baby nestled against her chest let out a soft whimper. Not quite a cry, just a noise, a fragile plea for something warmer, safer, more certain than what life had offered him so far. She held him closer, whispering something not even she could hear clearly, half prayer, half lullaby. Her breath fogged in the air. It was late, past midnight. The world had long gone to sleep, but not her. She hadn't really slept in weeks. The house before her stood alone, a crooked relic of time. Faded green shutters dangled unevenly. The porch light flickered, casting tired yellow rings over the creaky wooden floorboards. One shutter banged softly in the wind. It wasn't a welcoming place, not exactly, but it didn't need to be. She looked down at the photograph clutched in her trembling hand. It was singed around the edges, the paper stiff from soot and water damage. Half the face was missing, burned away, but the part that remained was unmistakable. A jawline, eyes shaped like a quiet storm. The same storm that now slept in the baby's features. The baby, his baby, her baby. She hadn't planned to come here, not really, but some paths choose you. It was the last address she had, scrawled in the margins of an old letter she had nearly thrown away. The letter hadn't been for her, it had been to him. She had found it folded inside a book he always kept by the bedside, the one he never finished. The letter was from his father. She stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking beneath her, as if warning of a past best left buried. Her hand rose slowly, hovering near the door like it might catch fire just from being too close. She imagined the man inside, asleep in an armchair with a blanket and a long-forgotten clock ticking in the corner. She imagined silence behind the walls, solitude, dust, and memories. But still, she knocked, once, a second time, then waited. Wind moved through the trees like whispers chasing one another. The baby shifted in her arms, letting out another soft sound, a hiccup, then a breath. She kissed the top of his head and tried not to cry. She had no more tears. They had run dry back at the train station when she gave away her last coat for 2 bottles of milk. One had broken, the other had spoiled. But still, the baby lived. That was something. The door creaked open slowly. A single eye peered through the crack. Then the rest of the face emerged, a man in his 60s, maybe older, with heavy lines drawn across his skin like a roadmap of years and losses. His gray beard was uneven, and his flannel shirt looked like it hadn't changed since fall began. His eyes narrowed at her. She said nothing. Instead, she raised the photograph. The old man's gaze dropped to it. He stared long, so long she wondered if he'd gone blind. Then, without saying a word, he opened the door wider. She stepped inside. The house was dimly lit by a small fireplace and one table lamp, its shade tilted to the side. It smelled of old wood, ashes, and something faintly sweet, tobacco maybe, or apples. The furniture was sparse and worn, the floorboards marked with the paths of someone who walked alone. It wasn't a place meant for visitors. He gestured to the sofa, and she sat without a word. The baby nestled into her chest again, already asleep once more. The old man disappeared briefly into what must have been a kitchen, the clinking of metal and water echoing through the silence. When he returned, he held a chipped mug in each hand, steam rising from one. He set one beside her, then took a seat across the room. Only now did he speak. "Where'd you get that photo?" She looked down at it again, though she'd memorized every crease. Her thumb had worn a groove into one corner. "It's all I had left of him," she said softly. Before the fire. The man's fingers twitched. He looked away for a second, then back at her. You knew my son. Her breath caught. The way he said my son made her throat tighten. Not which son. Not, are you sure? Just a quiet confirmation. She nodded. I lived with him for 2 years. We met during harvest season. He never talked about his family, not much. The old man nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd suspected all along. He leaned back, the chair groaning. That sounds like him. Silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't hollow. It was something else. Shared grief, perhaps, or mutual recognition of things lost. He died saving us, she said suddenly, her voice cracking. There was a fire in the shelter. Someone knocked over a stove. He carried out 3 people. Went back for 1 more. Never came back. The old man closed his eyes. Neither spoke for a long while. Outside, wind brushed the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote howled. I didn't know where else to go, she finally said, voice low. I thought maybe if you saw him in the baby, you'd understand. He looked at the child then, really looked. The lines around his eyes deepened. A flicker passed through them. Pain, yes, but also something else. Recognition, maybe even wonder. He's got the jaw, the man said finally. Same mouth when he sleeps. She smiled, barely. It broke something open inside her. He rose slowly and walked to a drawer near the fireplace, pulled something out, a photo album, covered in dust. He set it between them. I don't know what you're hoping for, he said, not unkindly, but there's space here, and I think my son would want me to open the door, if he can't anymore. Tears welled in her eyes for the first time in days, not from pain, but from the quiet, unfamiliar tug of hope. She leaned her head back against the sofa. The baby stirred, then settled, and for the first time in a long time, she let the silence mean something else, something safe. She thought she'd found shelter for a night, but 1 letter in the old man's drawer would change everything. The fire had burned down to quiet embers by morning. Pale light leaked through the torn curtains, touching the worn floorboards like the gentle hand of someone afraid to wake an old wound. The scent of cedar and smoke still lingered in the air, clinging to the fabric of the house and everything inside it, including her. She sat up on the old mattress, its springs groaning under the motion. The baby stirred beside her, stretching with that newborn strength that always surprises soft fists, a yawn like a flower blooming. She kissed his forehead, breathed him in. He smelled like sleep and milk and something achingly new. For a moment, she just sat there in the stillness, unsure of how to move forward. She'd learned that safety was always temporary. A place could feel warm for a night, and then vanish like a mirage by morning. People made promises, then disappeared. But something about this place, the creaks in the floor, the way the old man hadn't asked too much, made her hesitate. She wasn't used to the kind of silence that wasn't dangerous. She got up quietly, bundled the baby in his blanket, and stepped barefoot into the hallway. The wood was cold under her feet, but it felt grounding. She walked toward the kitchen, where the kettle from last night still sat on the stove, now cold and silent. She moved carefully, as though the house might startle awake if she stepped too loudly. In a corner of the kitchen sat a battered rocking chair with an Afghan tossed over it. She could almost imagine a woman in it once, humming, waiting, growing older 1 day at a time. But there were no pictures on the walls, no signs of a family, just the echoes of what used to be. She washed her mug from the night before and looked for a place to return it. The cabinets leaned like tired shoulders, and 1 drawer was left slightly open. Without thinking, she reached down to nudge it shut, but it resisted. Something thick blocked its path. Curiosity hovered. She resisted, but only for a breath. She pulled it open carefully. Inside was a stack of letters, bound with fraying twine. Some were yellowed, others still crisp, like they'd been untouched for years. One envelope sat on top, unsealed. Her fingers trembled the moment she recognized the handwriting. She would have known it anywhere it was his. The ink had smudged slightly in places, as if written in a hurry or with a heavy heart. Her thumb brushed the edge of the paper, her breath caught between ribs. She looked toward the hallway. No sound, just the soft crackle of the cooling hearth. She unfolded the letter. Dad, I know this might never reach you, but if it does, I just want you to know I'm trying to be better. I left because I didn't know how to stay. I thought leaving was what strength looked like. Turns out, it was fear, the kind I never knew I carried. I met someone. She's good. Not just good like kind, good like quiet water, like shade in July. I think you'd like her. I'm scared of what I feel, and I'm scared of what I'll become if I stay afraid. But, for the first time in a long time, I want to build something, a real life. Not one of drifting from job to job, storm to storm, if I don't come back. Tell her I wanted to. Tell her I meant to. Tell her I loved her, even when I didn't know how to say it right. And if there's a child, she couldn't read further. Her fingers shook too hard. Her chest tightened around a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The letter slid from her lap to the table as her free hand covered her mouth. A child he had known, or at least suspected. Tears she thought had dried long ago suddenly returned with quiet fury. She clutched the baby tighter, swaying slightly on her feet. He had wanted to come back, and the old man, the stranger, who opened his door without knowing the full truth, he had been waiting. Maybe not actively, maybe not hopefully, but something in him had still opened the drawer enough to let that letter breathe. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. She turned sharply, startled. The old man stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame, the other holding a small tin of tobacco. His face was unreadable. I didn't mean to, she began, ashamed, but he shook his head. It's yours, he said softly. Always was. She blinked. What do you mean? He stepped into the room and sat at the small table. That letter, he said, pointing with a nod. He left it for me, but he wrote it for you. She hesitated. You knew I'd come. No, he replied, but he did. He believed in. You said you were stronger than you knew. Said if anything ever happened to him, you'd carry on. She sank into the chair across from him, the baby nestled in her arms. Now watching the light shift across the ceiling. I don't feel strong, she whispered. Strength isn't loud, the old man said. It's not what we think. It's showing up when you're scared. It's knocking on a door at midnight, holding a child in a hope that the world might still make room for you. They sat in silence for a while, the fire clicking faintly behind them. I spent a long time being angry at him, the man said. My son. I didn't understand why he left, thought he was weak. But when I read that letter, he trailed off. I realized he was trying to become the kind of man I never gave him the space to be. She reached for the letter again, this time with gentler hands. There's more, she said. The old man nodded. Go on. She read it aloud this time, her voice cracking but steady. And if there's a child, tell them I wanted to be the kind of father who stays, that I wanted to build something better, that I was scared, but love made me brave. Tell them I hope they have your eyes, because your eyes see the world like it's still worth saving. The old man closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were rimmed red. Do you have anywhere to go? He asked, voice rasping. She shook her head. No one left. He nodded once. Then stay, at least until spring. Maybe longer, if you want. She looked around the room. The baby let out a small giggle in his sleep, a sound like the first crack of dawn after a long, bitter night. She smiled. It was small, but it stayed. Okay, she said. And just like that, the house breathed differently, as if after years of holding its breath, it was finally ready to exhale. The past has a way of returning, sometimes with answers, sometimes with storms. Winter arrived without asking permission. One morning, the world outside had simply turned white. Snow coated the earth like a burial cloth, muting the landscape, until even the birds seemed to whisper. The sky hung low and heavy, the kind of gray that felt closer than clouds should. Inside the house, the fire became their sun. They lived by its rhythm, feeding it, sitting near it, watching its glow flicker against the walls. The baby, now stronger and more curious, had learned to crawl. He dragged himself across the living room rug like a tiny explorer, laughing at the way his fingers disappeared in the folds of the old man's long flannel shirt. His giggles became music in a house that had been silent for too long. She had never intended to stay this long. At first, it was just until her feet stopped aching, then until the weather improved, then until the baby's cough faded. But winter had a way of holding on to people, and truth be told, so did warmth. The old man she had stopped calling him, that in her mind, was gentler now, quieter still, but in a thoughtful way. Every morning, he brought in wood, stopping to let the baby grab his fingers and pull on them like reins. Every night, he sat by the window, sipping tea, staring into the wind like it held memories too. Fragile to speak aloud, but peace is a delicate thing. It shattered that Tuesday evening she had just finished washing the baby's clothes in the sink and hanging them by the stove to dry when the knock came. Not the hesitant kind, not like hers that first night. This one was sharp, measured, male, 3 knocks, then silence. Then again, she froze. The baby, now at her feet, looked up and sensed it, the shift in air, the sudden stillness in her breath. The old man stood slowly from his chair. His eyes were already wary, scanning the shadows of the room as if expecting them to come alive. He walked to the door without a word. When he opened it, the cold poured in like judgment. 3 men stood on the porch. The one in front wore a long brown coat, his sheriff's badge dulled with age and dust. He looked tired, but not weak. Behind him stood a man with eyes like flint and hands that kept twitching toward his belt. The third held a notebook, his fingers already moving across the page. "We're looking for a woman," the sheriff said. His voice was dry, businesslike, mid-20s. Came through the train station in Cooper's Hollow 2 months back. Had a baby. Fire broke out not long after she left. Witnesses say she fled the scene. The baby gurgled behind her. She stepped forward. "I'm the one you're looking for." The room grew colder. The man with the notebook paused, eyes lifting. The sheriff's gaze moved to the child. "This, your boy?" She nodded. "Yes." He sighed. "We don't know exactly what happened, just that the shelter burned down. Some think it was faulty wiring. Some think." His eyes lingered on her. "You stole food, maybe money. One woman says you argued with a worker. They're calling it arson." "I didn't set the fire," she said quietly. "But I did leave. I had to." "Why?" She looked down at her son. "Because no one was going to protect us. That place was supposed to be safe, but the man who ran it, he wasn't what he seemed." The old man's hand clenched the edge of the doorframe. "I reported him," she said. "I tried. They didn't believe me. Said I was unstable, emotional. I was alone. No last name, no family, just a baby and an empty bag. They said I must have made it up." The sheriff was silent. "I left before it got worse. I didn't think the place would burn. I didn't wish that on anyone, but I had to protect my son." The flint-eyed man stepped forward. "You expect us to just take your word?" "I don't expect anything," she said. "I came here because I had nowhere left to go. That man," she motioned to the elder behind her, "is the boy's grandfather. He didn't even know I existed. He let us in anyway." The notebook man scribbled something. The sheriff looked around the room. The small stove, the baby's toys, the worn sofa. You've been here the whole time." She nodded. The sheriff turned to the old man. "That true?" He met the sheriff's eyes. "She arrived late one night, carrying the baby and a photograph of my son. I read the letter. It was from him. He knew about the child. Said if anything ever happened, we were to take care of each other." The sheriff's face softened, just slightly. "You're saying this is your grandson?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." The baby reached up toward the man's beard and giggled. For a moment, no one moved. The wind howled through the trees outside. The sheriff looked back at her. "No one's pressing charges." "Not yet. The shelter's gone. The manager's missing. The investigation is complicated, but you're not forgotten. People remember. If you stay here, someone will come eventually." "I'm not running anymore," she said. "Not from them. Not from my story." The old man spoke again. "Then let them come. They'll find her here, with her son, with her family." The sheriff looked at the baby again, then gave a short nod. "All right. For now, we'll leave. You be. But we may return." He turned and stepped off the porch. The others followed. The man with the flint eyes looked back one more time, his expression unreadable, then disappeared into the white. When the door closed, she let out the breath she'd been holding. Her knees buckled, and she sat on the floor. The baby climbed into her lap, sensing her fear, her exhaustion, her relief. The old man sat beside them. "You told the truth. I had to." He nodded. "That's how you start over, with truth." She leaned into him, not all the way, but enough. Enough to let the warmth pass between them again. Later that night, after the baby had fallen asleep in his crib near the fire, they sat in silence. "You know they might still take him," she said. "I won't let them," the old man replied. "I lost one son. I'm not losing another. But if they prove the fire was my fault," he turned to her, "it won't matter. What matters is what you did after. You saved him, you survived, and you walked to a stranger's door in the dead of night, with nothing but a baby and a photo. That's not what guilt looks like. That's what courage looks like." She didn't reply, but the tears on her cheeks were answer enough. That night, snow fell heavier. The roof groaned beneath its weight, but inside, something stronger was settling in. Not fear, not even defiance. Something else. Roots. Some endings don't close doors. They open them. Winter did not relent easily. The snow stayed longer than it should have, as if reluctant to loosen its grip on the earth. Days blurred into one another, gray and white and still. On some mornings, they could hear the sound of icicles forming beneath the eaves, slow drips turning to ice mid-air. The wind whistled like a lonely song through the trees, brushing the cabin with memories. But inside, the cold never truly reached them. The hearth burned quietly, a small but steady fire, the kind that didn't crackle for attention, but simply kept them alive. Life settled into its own rhythm, not the fast one she had known, where everything was survival and every noise was a warning, but something slower, softer, sacred. The baby grew fast. His steps were still wobbly, but his will was strong. He chased light across the floorboards, reaching for sunbeams like they were promises. He laughed freely, and every time he did, the old man looked up from whatever he was doing, whittling, sanding wood, oiling old hinges, and smiled in a way that didn't need explanation. She found herself humming again, small tunes, ones she didn't even know she remembered. Sometimes lullabies, sometimes the melody of nothing in particular. She started to read in the evenings, not for information, but for joy. Her voice floated through the cabin like steam from tea. The baby listened, curled in the old man's lap, wide-eyed as though her words wove magic into the room. There were still shadows. On certain nights, when the wind carried too many memories, she would wake in a cold sweat. The old man never said anything, just brewed tea, left it by her door, and that quiet gesture, never asked for, never explained, said everything. She still didn't know what to call him. Dad didn't feel right. Sir felt distant. Mr. felt absurd. So mostly, she called him nothing. And yet, everything in the way she looked at him, moved around him, trusted him, it all said what words could not. The sheriff had not returned, but there was no illusion that the story was over. They had made peace with that uncertainty. They lived in the quiet spaces between what was and what might come. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. It bore no return address. The envelope was plain, but it had her name on it, not scrawled or typed, but written in neat, careful handwriting. Inside, folded with precision, was a single clipping from a regional newspaper, yellowed slightly at the edges. The headline read, "Shelter Director Arrested in Mexico Linked to Human Trafficking Ring." Below it, a black and white photo, a man in handcuffs flanked by 2 agents. She recognized him instantly. His smile was gone. The charm had drained from his face, and justice, after so long, had finally taken shape. She dropped to her knees on the porch. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but release. The old man stepped up behind her, holding the baby now, chubby and alert, against his shoulder. He looked down at her, brows furrowed. She handed him the clipping. He read it once, then again, then he exhaled and smiled, not wide, not triumphant, but the kind of smile that begins in the chest, soft and slow, and makes its way to the eyes over time. "You were right," he said quietly. But she wasn't thinking about being right. She was thinking about all the people who hadn't believed her, about the woman who told her to stop causing trouble, about the caseworker who never followed up, about the nights she stared at the ceiling, doubting her own memory, wondering if maybe she had imagined it. It wasn't about being right, it was about being seen, and for the first time in years, she felt it, the sensation of truth finding air, of light falling where shame had once lived. Later that night, they celebrated in the only way they knew how. She cooked a stew using dried herbs from the back porch. The old man carved a wooden spoon with the baby's initials. They lit an extra candle. The baby clapped at the flickering flame. Small joys, sacred rituals. The next day she walked into town with her head held higher. The storekeeper, who used to look through her like glass, smiled and handed her a warm loaf of bread on the house. A woman from the church group nodded and whispered, "We always hoped you were telling the truth." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth had answered for her. Weeks passed. The world thawed. Spring made its slow entrance, first with a trickle of water, then the soft green push of leaves along the tree line. Birds returned. Grass crept through the snow. The cabin, once buried, began to breathe again. She planted a garden, not because she knew how, but because something in her needed to believe in growth. The old man helped, kneeling slowly, guiding her hands. They planted carrots, beans, and flowers, with names she couldn't pronounce, but loved anyway. One afternoon, as they worked side by side, he paused and asked, "Do you think you'll go back to the city someday?" She wiped her forehead. "Maybe. Not yet. You could do anything now. They'd take your story, publish it. People would want interviews." She shook her head. "I just want quiet." He nodded. "That's fair." There was a pause. Then she added, "But maybe, someday, I'll write it myself." He smiled. "I'd read it." In the evenings, she wrote by the fire. Not long pages, just lines, phrases. The way the baby's eyes looked when he laughed. The way the wind moved the curtains. The first time the old man held the child like he'd always known him. She wrote not for revenge, but remembrance. Because some stories aren't told for crowds. Some are told for the ones who lived them, to keep them alive. Even after silence has set in, and in time, the baby grew into his own. He learned to walk, then run. He called the old man Papa one day, unprompted, while chasing a pine cone across the porch. The old man stopped in his tracks, turned slowly, and picked him up with trembling hands. Later, he said nothing about it, but that night, She found the photo of her son, his father, placed gently on the mantel, framed, no longer hidden. And perhaps that was the final step. Not forgetting, but remembering without drowning.